Sometimes comparison can creep in without us even realizing. It's not always loud. Sometimes it's just a quiet sense that we might not be doing enough, successful enough, or moving fast enough. So in this video, I'm showing what I've learned about social comparison, backed by psychology and cognitive neuroscience. Hi, I'm Leona. I studied psychology, cognitive neuroscience, and public health. And on this channel, I share science-backed well-being content to help you thrive emotionally, physically, and financially. So before we get into this video fully, let me acknowledge the following, right, and unpack. So yes, comparison can definitely be harmful sometimes. However, comparison isn't always a bad thing, even if it often feels that way. From a cognitive neuroscience perspective, comparison is part of our survival wiring, right? So it's how the brain figures out where we are, where we want to be, and what might keep us safe. So regions like the medial prefrontal cortex and striatum activate when we basically assess ourselves in relation to others. It isn't just emotional, so it's built into how we actually process status, belonging, and opportunity. There's also a psychological reason why we even do this. So according to social comparison theory, we learn about ourselves by observing others. So this could mean comparison can help us actually get clearer about our values or even spark inspiration. So if we see someone doing something we admire and we believe that growth is actually possible for us too, so it can actually be quite motivating sometimes. So for instance, you may have had moments where someone else's successes, for example, made you reflect, definitely not with jealousy at all, but maybe more with curiosity. Yeah, that kind of upwards comparison, it's not actually destructive. It could have potentially been like really directional for you. So before I get into this video and describe how to stop comparing yourself, just to be clear, when I talk about stopping comparison, I mean the type of comparison that really drains you and can make you just feel stuck, not the type that can help you reflect, grow, and evolve and help you do better. Okay, so let's start with why we compare and how to stop it when it actually feels harmful. So let's say you're in a phase in your life where you've noticed you're comparing yourself and actually it doesn't feel good and you want to kind of reduce those social comparisons you're making, right? So there's a reason they hit so hard. So psychologically, comparisons often trigger what researchers call self-discrepancy theory. So the gap between who you are now and who you think you should be. So that should self can be shaped by social media, childhood messages, or even like your own perfectionism. And when the brain sees a gap, it doesn't think it can quite close. It doesn't motivate us. It can actually just deflate us. For example, in the brain, this can show up as increased activity in the anterior cingulate cortex, which is involved in error detection and basically flags when something feels off. So about how you're doing compared to others, for example. So that's why a scroll through social media can sometimes leave you feeling a bit off, right, and unsettled, even if nothing obvious is wrong. Something you could try when you feel that kind of comparison creeping in is to pause and ask, hold on, is what I'm comparing against actually aligned with what I even want? Or is it just louder in this present moment? Because often we're not actually comparing ourselves to people with the same values as us, for example, just the ones with the strongest visibility. So when you notice that, you could take a moment to just come offline, for example, journal out what actually matters to you and reground in that. It's not about pretending like you don't care. It's just about caring more about what aligns with you personally. So if your comparison is stealing peace instead of building your vision, the solution isn't to stop caring, it's to basically just get clearer on what you actually even truly care about. Point number 3 is that you don't always know the full story. One thing that could help you avoid comparison is remembering this. You never see someone's full story, especially online. You might see like their job update or the relationship milestones, but you won't see the internal wrestle that it took to get there. There's a psychological term called impression management. It's basically the idea that people present the version of themselves they believe will basically be accepted. And often that can mean filtering out like the messier parts of their life. So this is especially true on social media, where most people post the highlight reels of their life, not what's happening behind the scenes. So the brain can struggle with this because of something called availability bias. So we assume what we see is representative of reality simply because it's in front of us. So when you see people constantly posting wins, it's actually really easy to forget that actually they might be facing the same doubts that you may be facing, just doing that in private. So something you might try is intentionally following people who tend to show a bit more of their life. So not just the polished moments, and actually, right, more importantly, try anchoring back to your own lane. If you find yourself comparing, ask this: what do I not know about their story? Or what do I already know about my own story? That small shift in focus can bring things back to just perspective. So when comparison creeps in, remind yourself of this. You're not behind. You're just seeing someone else's story out of context. And really, you should be focusing on your own story. Okay, so this next point I absolutely love, right? And it's basically spend time with people who ground you in truth. When the comparisons start to get loud, sometimes the best thing isn't necessarily mindset, right? It could be about meaningful connection. So spend time with people who ground you in truth. There's strong research basically showing that spending time with people who genuinely care about you, basically who see beyond your achievements, can buffer the negative effects of social comparisons. In psychology, this basically connects to attachment theory, which is the idea that safe, consistent relationships help regulate our emotions and restore perspective. So one thing that you could actually try is spending more time with the people who actually aren't obsessed with appearances or your metrics, right? People who remind you of who you are without performance. And if you're someone of faith, it might help to actually make space to pray and ask God to ground your worth in something deeper than external validation. So like a quiet moment of prayer can remind you that actually you're already seen and you're already enough. So honestly, if comparison is making you feel small, reach out to your community, not just content, and ask God to remind you of what's already true. Okay, so one of the easiest ways to fall into comparison is basically to forget that everyone is on a different timeline, especially in your 20s and even early 30s, when people are just living their lives and are on completely different levels or completely different stages in their own timeline. Psychologically, this links to something called temporal comparison, right? And this basically means that when we measure our current situation against someone else's progress without actually factoring all the context, that comparison can actually trigger stress in the brain's default mode network, which is involved in self-reflection. This means it can distort how we actually see our own journey. So something you might actually try is physically zooming out, right? So look back at a journal or calendar and trace how far you've come. So not just in results, but in growth. It can literally remind you that you have made so much progress doing your own thing and concentrating on your own journey. You could also try protecting your own pace, for example. So saying no to pressure or choosing alignment over urgency and reminding yourself that slow growth is still growth. Honestly, if you ever feel like you're behind, just zoom out and focus on your own journey and focus on your own timeline. And I've said this in a previous video, but when you are focused on your own goals and your own journey, you don't have time to see what everyone else is doing. Okay, so here's something that might shift things a bit for you. Comparison isn't just about what we do, it's about what we absorb. And one thing that could really help is to consciously audit the content, conversations, and influences that you're being exposed to daily. So in psychology, this basically connects to the social cognitive theory, which is the idea that we learn by observing others. So especially when those behaviors are rewarded. For example, when you constantly see curated success stories online, your brain can actually internalize those patterns and start measuring your worth against them. So even if you don't consciously want to. Okay, so girl, what I'm trying to say here is you need to stop and shine your eyes. You need to stop and basically just evaluate whose posts are you watching. Like, is it making you feel inspired or is it making you feel like tense and discouraged? And to be honest, it's really about choosing what supports the mindset you're trying to grow. So if comparison keeps creeping in, try starting with your inputs, right? Because what shapes your environment, honestly, often shapes your own self-perception. So just be a bit more mindful about what you're actually consuming. Okay, so this next point is so important, honestly, especially in a world where numbers feel like they define everything, whether it's follower counts, your salary bands, or likes, right? Metrics can be helpful, but they shouldn't become your whole world and definitely not your mirror. So the brain's reward system, especially the ventral striatum, lights up when we receive social validation, like positive feedback or recognition, for example. But when we attach our identity to those external cues, we start chasing validation rather than alignment, and that's not good. Okay, cool. So you might be thinking, I hear you, but what can I actually do? I would say maybe try tracking your internal wins as intentionally as you may be tracking your external ones. So maybe you log moments of bravery, kindness, or showing up when it was hard. These don't come with metrics, but they're signs of real growth. Honestly, if you're in a season where you think metrics matter, like building something publicly, that's okay. Just remember, the numbers are data, not identity. You're allowed to care without letting them define you. Instead of letting metrics become your mirror, try looking at your choices, your consistency, and your character. That's where the real progress lives. Okay, so this next point is learn from comparison without staying there. Sometimes comparison shows up as a lesson, right? But we don't need to stay in that loop forever. One thing that could really help is learning from comparison, then choosing to just move forward without ever carrying the weight of it. So this relates really well to a concept actually in psychology called self-compassionate reflection, where we observe our feelings or behavior, but basically respond with kindness rather than judgment. So instead of spiraling into, wait, hold on, why am I not there yet? You could try shift into, what is the feeling telling me? And how can I use it constructively? Honestly, this shift can activate the prefrontal cortex, which helps you reflect with clarity instead of reacting emotionally. So over time, the more you practice that perspective shift, the faster your brain gets at moving out of comparison and into actually doing something. It's not about pretending comparison doesn't happen, because we know it does. It's about refusing to let it steal your energy once the insight has already been gained. So when comparison shows up, honestly guys, listen briefly, learn wisely, and then just let it go. Right, so if your brain keeps saying you're behind, one thing that might help is actually offering it real tangible evidence that you're not. So we know the brain naturally scans for threats or gaps, right? Especially when you're tired or stretched. This is partly because of how the amygdala filters emotion and uncertainty. When we compare, the brain sometimes over-focuses on what's missing and under-focuses on what's already working. Something practical that you could try is basically keeping a confidence folder. I know it's crazy, but it might include screenshots of kind messages, reminders of tough seasons you were able to navigate, or just proof of consistency. You can also journal out small wins at the end of each week, especially the ones no one else sees. Honestly, this process doesn't just feel good, it trains the hippocampus, which is your memory center, to store more balanced information. The next time your comparison starts spiraling out of control, your brain will have something to come back to. When your brain forgets how far you've come, give it something real to remember. The next is to move at a pace of peace. Honestly, in a world that celebrates speed, choosing to move at the pace of peace is one of the most countercultural decisions you can make. Psychologically, we're basically wired to mirror the urgency of our environment. It's part of the concept called social conformity theory. When everyone around you is launching or progressing or posting constant wins, it can make you feel like you might be falling behind, even if your path is intentional. But peace isn't passive, honestly, it's something you protect. Here's something you could try, right? Create a rhythm of your life that basically honors both purpose and rest. That might look like defining your version of success, for example, or turning off notifications during your important times when you focus and get stuff done, or even try going on silent walks just to help you recenter. When peace becomes your pace, you honestly just start living more in alignment instead of urgency, and you stop trying to match timelines that were never even meant to be yours in the first place, and you can focus on your own timeline. So when the world tries to rush you, which it does, try anchor into peace. It's not slow, it's intentional. And if you've been watching most of my videos, you know that I always try to end it with a faith point. But if you're someone of faith, one of the most powerful ways, right, to rise above comparison is through spiritual perspective. Honestly, prayer helps, right? It really does. So practices like prayer activate areas of the brain linked to meaning and long-term thinking, especially the default mode network and the ventral medial prefrontal cortex. So that's where reflection and identity settle. If you're not someone of faith, you might still find value in stepping back and just asking, hold on, what is this season about for me? What am I learning? What am I healing from? That lens can often dissolve the urgency of comparison. This habit is about zooming out, right? Remembering that actually life isn't a race and your story doesn't have to look like anyone else's. So when comparison starts to cloud your mind, if you're a Christian, pray, ask the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit for peace. If not, simply pause and just realign with the bigger picture. I hope you found today's content valuable and useful. If you did and you ever want to come back and re-watch any of the points or take down notes, feel free to. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.